All right, this is our intro for the logo design project for Tech Transfer. So, first things first, guess what? You're creating logos. You are going to create a minimum of 6 logos. They are going to be type logos as well as just your standard logos. So your logos have to include some type of text within them. You're free to work in color or black and white or both. And they should represent a fictional company of your own creation. So you're coming up with the company name. It could be fictional. It can have your name in it. That is up to you. You're going to need to look at a lot of examples. Logos are actually really difficult because they seem so simple. You have a lot of creative freedom with this project. So make sure you're paying attention to details. I've already put this assignment on Google Classroom, and the assignment actually includes 3 different YouTube videos that I thought might also be helpful for you to watch and reference as you're designing, especially if you're not sure where to get started. If you take a look at the file size, you're looking at a 3x3, which is pretty small, but that's okay. You're going to be, like I said, doing 6 logo designs, and that means you're going to need 6 different artboards. Remember, logo designs tend to be pretty simple, but that means you really need to pay attention to details. And it also does not mean that they are boring. They should still be interesting. Remember that a logo also has to live in many spaces on many different things in many different sizes. So we're talking about letterheads, envelopes, business cards, billboards, sides of trucks. Depending on what your business is, it may be on a label. So these things you need to consider as you're designing. Now, here's an example of student artwork from this project. Zoom out here. Notice this student has 6 artboards. Each one is 3 inches by 3 inches. It's okay that their logo doesn't take up the entire space as long as it fits within the 3x3 artboard. Another important thing is when you're creating this file, you need to make sure that you're in the CMYK color mode. Why? Because we are designing for print. This is really important when it comes to printing your designs. And your logos, we're going to choose 3 of them, and we're going to actually print them as stickers. So make sure that you're setting it up as CMYK. If you don't know how to do that, or you didn't do that when you first created your file, you need to go to File, Document Color Mode, and make sure that CMYK color is checked. If you're creating a new file, when you go to create your file, again, you should have 3 inches by 3 inches for your artboard. You need 6 of them. And you should have, it should say color mode CMYK. You can change it in the advanced options. Now, choosing colors is really important when we're talking about designing logos. Ms. Boone has a Pantone color book. If you're not familiar with what that looks like, it's kind of a, it looks like the paint swatches you might see in Lowe's or Home Depot. And it's a place where you can check and see what the color is going to look like before you even print it. So if you're looking for a specific color and you want to make sure that your colors turn out the way that you want before printing, make sure you're asking about the Pantone color book. To adjust Pantone colors, that should be something that you do within your swatches panel. Let me select an object. On my right-hand side in my properties panel, I'll have my fill and stroke. I can click on my fill, and this is my swatches panel, right? So there's multiple ways to do this. You should be familiar with this by now since you guys are my tech transfer students. If you double click on a swatch in here, not only does your object change to that color, but you can adjust the CMYK values. Another way to do this is by clicking down here, this blank page that says New Swatch. This is going to allow us to create a new and unique color based on what we found in our Pantone color book, so that we can get an accurate color for printing as opposed to just what we see on the computer screen. Now, this is also important when we go to set up our files for printing, when we're talking about cutting lines. Anytime we're using cutting lines, we're usually printing on something that's going to be a sticker or maybe even a t-shirt transfer. In this case, we're talking stickers. So this is really important. You can see the student that created this design did go ahead and create cutting lines. That's what these little pink lines are here for. He's created a nice little white border around all of his designs so that it's not going to cut directly on the edge of the letters. Yes, we can cut directly on the edge of letters. There's a little bit more consideration when we're doing that. Things like bleed over and making sure that we're cutting accurately. For this project, I would like you guys to make sure that there is at least somewhat of a white border all the way around your design before you put cut lines on. So let's talk about how to do that. Okay. First things first, if you've got text, you have one of two options. If it's floating text like this, you can either do it like this student did where it's cutting around each individual letter, or you can just create a rounded rectangle to do this. So I'm going to delete this pink cut line here, and we're going to recreate it, or recreate something similar to it. So like I said, we can create, he's already created outlines of all the text. There's no text boxes here in this design. The first way to create cutting lines is going to be to make a copy, right? So I'm going to hold Alt and click and drag. So now that I have two of my logo designs. With the duplicate there, I want to combine all of these shapes into one using my Pathfinder window. If your Pathfinder window does not show up on the right-hand side, you can come to the top, click on Window, and open your Pathfinder window. Mine is already open over here. Remember, sometimes this little window likes to show up down here for some reason. If you don't see it, take a look down here in the bottom of your window. You should be able to drag it up here to make a tab. So with all my objects selected in my duplicate logo, I'm going to go ahead and use this Unite option. This should be familiar to you, but it may have been a while since you've used this last. So now I've got a duplicate single shape of my logo. I'm going to change the color of this. Just for reference, I'm going to go to Properties window, and I'm going to make it this pink color. Now, let's move this back on top of our original logo. Okay, do your best to line this up. It's pretty important that you line it up accurately. All right, there we go. And I'm going to right-click, arrange, and send it to the back. Make sure you're not deselecting. Notice it's still selected on my screen, and it's still the pink version. It's got a pink fill. I want to click and drag to make a pink outline stroke as well. I'm going to use my stroke options over here in my properties window to bump that stroke weight up. Sometimes when you're doing this, you're going to see some jagged edges that you might not necessarily want. You may want to smooth those out by going to stroke and adjusting your corner option to round. Notice how those rounded out nicely. Now, I need to expand this shape. So let's go to Object, Expand, and then push OK. Notice it's added some lines that overlap. Let's go back to this Pathfinder window option to unite those. Notice how those disappeared really nicely. Again, if that Pathfinder window didn't open in your Properties panel, hopefully you've got it as a tab over here. If not, you can go to Window and Pathfinder. So once you've got that done, you can swap this fill color of pink to a stroke color, and there's your cutting line. So for cutting in Illustrator, right, for setting up our file for printing and cutting in Illustrator, the stroke weight needs to be 0.25. Also, wherever you see that line is exactly where it's going to cut. So that means that if you don't want your letters to be like this, where it's kind of jagged, if you'd rather just have this cut a rounded rectangle around this, we can do that. So let's see how we can do that. Let's grab our rounded rectangle tool. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a rounded rectangle over top of my text. All right. I'm going to need to adjust the round widgets right here, the corner widgets, because they're a little bit too round. And I can adjust my shape. Let's fix those corners up. There we go. And I'm going to stretch this so that it comes all the way into there, right? Because I don't want it to mess up this R. Or maybe I do. That's up to you. Okay, so I've got that set. I'm going to do the same thing to the word infinite down here. I can draw another rounded rectangle, or I can just copy and paste the one that I've already drawn and resize it. That's what I'm going to do. And I want to make sure that it kind of overlaps with the rounded rectangle that I just drew a second ago. Again, the corners you may need to adjust. This word's a little smaller, so you might want it to look a little bit different. All right. Now, what I just did was I selected both the rectangles I drew. click on this one, and then I'm going to hold shift and click on the other one. This is where Shape Builder comes in really handy. I'm going to use my Shape Builder tool right here and click and drag over to unite those shapes. I can do the same thing by shift clicking on my overall shape that I just created for the logo and using my rounded rectangles and combining some of these shapes. Remember, the overall red shape is what it's going to look like in the end. Okay, I still have a couple of shapes here that need to be fixed. Remember, you can hold Alt and click to delete those. Whoops, that's not right. Alt click. I can click on the actual paths to delete the paths, which may be a little bit more helpful when you're doing this. The more precise you are for this, the better your cut lines are going to look. Ooh, that's a little bit funky. The better your cut lines are going to look when they're printed. There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so pay attention to detail when you're doing this. How in the world did that happen? There we go. Okay, so that looks pretty good. There. So maybe you want yours to look like that, and that's totally fine too. Now, color is also important when we're talking about cutting lines. So I'm going to select this shape, and I'm going to go to that swatches panel by clicking on my stroke color. I have a very specific color that you need to use for cutting lines for the Roland printer in the back. Let's go ahead and create a new swatch. So for this cutting swatch, we're going to put a specific name on it. We're going to name it Cut Contour. Make sure you're capitalizing the C's and you're spelling this correctly. This is not a process color. So where it says color type, change this to spot color. And the settings should be 0, the C should be 0, M for magenta should be 100, Y for yellow should be 0, and K for black should also be 0. So 0, 100, 0, 0, and then we're going to push OK. Okay, there's my new swatch. Notice it's different than the other pink one. It does have this little white triangle in the corner. That means it's a spot color as opposed to a process color. This has to be the way that your swatch is set up in order for the printer to recognize that this is a cut line. Okay, so 0.25 stroke weight and making sure that that is your specific color for cutting. Okay. When you're saving your file, once you've done this for all of your logos, everything looks lovely, everything's great, you set everything up for cutting, make sure that you're saving your file correctly. Not only are we naming it the correct name, right? We're naming our last name, underscore first name, underscore logos. But we're also going to save this as an EPS file as opposed to AI. Why? Because the program that runs the printer needs to see this in an EPS format. We're going to go over in a separate lesson a little bit more detail about using the Roland VersaWorks software. That's all I've got for this tutorial for our logo project. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.